Hilchos Bikkurim Ushar Matnas Kahuna Shebagvulin Perek Sheni, the laws of the first fruits and all the other Kohanic gifts that apply in all of Israel, chapter 2. Today we are going to begin examining Bikkurim, specifically the laws of the first fruits. Throughout these chapters we cover all the different gifts that relate to the Kohanim, as the Rambam explained in yesterday's chapter, but for today and tomorrow and the next day, we're going to be focused specifically on Bikkurim and what divine providence that is, because this Perek is being studied on the holiday of Shavuos. We're pre-recording the class before the holiday, but one of the names of Shavuos is Yom HaBikkurim, the day of the first fruits. So to be learning about the first fruits on the holiday of the first fruits is a tremendous hashgacha pratis. It's funny that last year on Shavuos we studied the laws of Torah study, Talmud Torah, and this year we're studying the laws of Bikkurim. Amazing how it all comes together in that way. So the Rambam introduces the basics of Bikkurim today. Halacha Aleph, mitzvah saseh, lahavi bikurim lamikdash. It's a positive commandment, one of the 613, that every year, every farmer is supposed to bring some of his first fruits to the Holy Temple. However, these laws only apply in the time that the Beis HaMikdash was standing, and only in Israel. Shanemar, because the verse that describes the obligation, what does it say? It says, Reishis bikurei ad mascha tavi Beis Hashem alekecha. The beginning of the first fruits of your land, you should bring to the house of Hashem. So we see two things. First of all, it has to be your land, the Jewish land, that's Israel. Second of all, you have to be able to bring it to the Beis HaMikdash, which means that it only applies in the time when the temple is standing. Even though biblically you only bring Bikkurim from Israel, rabbinically we bring Bikkurim from all the lands of the Transjordan, what was conquered from Sichon and Og, when the Jews were in the desert, as well as from the area called Syria, which somewhat overlaps with modern-day Syria, the areas that David HaMelech conquered and were considered by the sages to have a semi-status of Israel, so we bring Bikkurim from those lands as well. Shehakoina b'Syria, kekoina b'Yerushalayim. In the eyes of the rabbis, a person who buys produce in Syria was considered like buying it in Jerusalem for many, many things in halacha, and therefore Bikkurim as well. Aval, Ammon, Umayyav, Ubavel, but the areas, the lands below Israel, Ammon and Moav, which the Jews also dealt with on their way to Israel, and Bavel, Babylonia, which is more like modern-day Iraq, even further east. Even though they have an obligation rabbinically of Truma and Maasros, the 2% to the Kohen, 10% to the Levi, and the other 10% to bring to Jerusalem or to give to the poor, Ein Mevi'in Mehen Bikkurim. Bikkurim, the obligation of the first fruits, doesn't apply in those lands. So much so that if you bring Bikkurim, you say, you know what, who cares, there's no mitzvah, I want to bring it anyways. If you bring Bikkurim to Israel from the diaspora, it's not even considered Bikkurim, it's considered nothing. Halacha Beis, Ein Mevi'in Bikkurim elo mishivas haminin ha'amurim b'shvach haaretz. We don't just bring Bikkurim from any type of fruit. First fruits are a reference specifically to the 7 species that are stated explicitly in the Torah in praise of Israel. Veheim they are, hachitim v'hasoirim, wheat and barley, v'ha'anavim v'hate'enim v'harimayim, and grapes and figs and pomegranates, v'hazesim v'hatmarim, and olives and dates. Same thing over here. If you bring any other fruit besides for those type, they don't become sanctified because they're not the ones that the Torah commands. Halacha Gimel, even when you're dealing in the category of the first fruits, ein mevi'in, you should not bring what the Rambam is going to define as lower quality fruit. Lo mitmarim shebaharim, v'lo miperes shebaamakim. Not from the dates that grow on high mountains, nor from the other fruit, let's say figs, that grow in the valleys. Those weren't the choice ones. Nor should you bring oil-producing olives if they're not the choicest. Ella, rather, what should you bring? Mitmarim sheba amakim, umiperes sheba harim. You should bring from the dates that grow in the valleys, and from the other fruit that grow on the mountaintops, because those are the choice ones. And again, the same principle applies. You only are supposed to bring what you're supposed to bring. If you choose to bring not the choicest, like you do bring those dates that grow on the mountaintops, or figs that are spoiled and rotten, or dusty and smoked grapes, they don't become holy. So you basically have in these halachas, you have 3 conditions. They have to be from Israel, of the 7 species, of the choicest. Halacha dalid ein mevi'in bikurim mashkin. You're not allowed to bring bikurim in liquid form. So you can't take pomegranates, make pomegranate juice, and then bring it to Jerusalem. Chutz mizesim va'anavim bilvad, with the exception of the olives and the grapes, those ones could be converted into oil or into wine, and bring the oil and wine as bikurim. Shenemar, because it says, pri ha'adama. So the verse that describes the obligation of bikurim, it says you should take from the beginning of the fruit of the land. Fruit meaning v'lay mashke, not the liquid. Oil and wine are considered to be inherently, that's the purpose for which you use olives and grapes. Therefore, that's considered the fruit, because that's the point of the fruit. But otherwise, it has to be the fruit. Again, if you bring it as liquid, we don't take it. Notice that Rambam doesn't say they don't become holy, because there's a debate in the commentaries if there's actually sanctification attached to it. But we definitely don't take it. The Kohen won't take it as acceptable bikurim. Halacha hey, hakrevim l'Yerushalayim, those Jews who lived in close proximity to Jerusalem, mevi'in te'enim va'anavim lachim, they were supposed to bring their figs and their grapes fresh, because they're not perishable. By the time you get to Yerushalayim, they're still edible. But those that are far, mevi'in eisam gregris v'tzimukin, initially they should bring dried figs and raisins, because you want to bring something that will last, that the Kohen can benefit from. So you're going to bring your fresh grapes and figs, by the time you get to Jerusalem, they're going to be spoiled. And therefore, they would purposely bring it in the dried form. Halacha vav ein mevi'in bikurim kaidem la'atzeres. In terms of the calendar, we're not allowed to bring bikurim before atzeres, before Shavuos. Shenemar, because the verse says, v'chag hakatzir bikurei ma'asecha. Literally a verse about Shavuos on Shavuos. The holiday of the harvest is the time when you should bring the first fruit of your actions, of your production. In other words, only from Shavuos and on. V'im hevi, if you did bring them before the holiday of Shavuos, this part of the timeline, the red, ein mekablin mimenu, we're not going to take it from you, but we're not going to say it doesn't become holy. We're just not going to take it from you now. Elo yanichem sham ad shetava yatzeres. Leave them in the temple. And the commentaries say, of course, we're referring to a case where it's non-perishable, it's not going to spoil. Say it's the grain. You leave them in the holy temple, ad shetava yatzeres, until Shavuos comes, v'yikra aleihan, and then you'll recite the declaration. We're going to see in chapter 4 that there was a special declaration that had to be made when you brought the Bikkurim. So the Rambam is saying that in this case, where you brought it before Shavuos, technically no damage has been done, because you can just leave it there and bring it later and redo the ceremony. We also cannot bring new produce, new fruits after Chanukah. Because any first fruits which grow after Chanukah will be considered from the next year, and you're not supposed to bring Bikurim from one year to the next, and therefore, you should leave them till the next Shavuos to bring the Bikurim then. In other words, the time frame is during those months between the holiday of Shavuos and the holiday of Chanukah. Halacha zayin ein mevi'in bikurim leimin chadash ala yashan v'leimin yashan ala chadash. You shouldn't bring bikurim from new fruits to cover old, or from old fruits to cover new ones. What's the demarcation line? When does fruit become old and new? Keitzad, what does this mean? Lo yavi mi peiros shechantu kaidem chamisha asar b'shvat al peiros shechantu achar chamisha asar bay. If you have fruit that began to bud, it began to sprout before the 15th of Shvat, which is the new year for trees, and you have fruit that began to bud or to sprout after the 15th of Shvat, you shouldn't bring bikurim from one group onto the other. Echad hanatua ve'echad ha'ila me'ila, that's whether you planted it actively or it grew wild. Shenemar bikure kol asher ba'artzam, because it says that you need to bring the bikurim from anything in your land. Anything means any situation where the tree grew, whether it grew on its own or you actively planted it. Halacha ches u'peiros shel shutfin, fruit owned by partners, chayavin b'bikurim, are also obligated to have bikurim taken from them. Shenemar, because it says bikurei kol asher be'artzam asher yaviu, written in the plural. Bikurim of anything that's in their land that they bring, implying that even if it's a they, two people owning a field jointly, they have to bring bikurim. Halacha tes hagadel be'otzitz, if fruit is growing in a flower pot, afal pishu nakuv, even if it has a hole attaching it to the ground. The hagadol bisfina, if a tree grows in a boat. Einay mevi mimenu kol ikar, you don't bring bikurim at all from such growths. Shenemar, because it says be'artzam, in the land. Bikurim has to grow in the land. Aval mevi min hagadol begag bechurba, but if you have a tree which grows on a roof or in a ruin in an abandoned place, you could and should bring bikurim from those trees. Halacha yud, we remember the concept of havracha. Havracha means layering. You take a tree that's growing and you take a branch and you put it into the ground, and from there it grows new roots and a new growth. So the question is going to be, does this consider to be a new tree, which has to have Bikkurim brought from it? The additional question is going to be, what happens if the two trees are in different properties, different domains? It says that a person plants a tree in his own field, and he layers it with the extending tree now rising up in a friend's field or in the public domain. Or the opposite, the tree was originally planted in your friend's domain or in the public domain, and then you layered it, extending it into your own property. Or both ends were in your property. The main part was in your property, you layered it into your property. However, but there was a pathway that was used either by the public or even by another private individual, dividing between the two parts of the tree. In other words, you layered it under a road, let's say. So both sides of the road are your property, but the road itself is not. Eine maybe Bikkurim, says the Rambam, in all these cases, the person does not bring Bikkurim. A fascinating law. You don't bring Bikkurim from neither side. Not the one that's in the other possession, not the one that's in your possession. Shenemar, because it says Bikurei ad mascha, the beginning of the Bikkurim of your land, which means ad sheyiyu kala gedulin me'ad mascha. In order for a tree to qualify to bring Bikkurim from it, everything that grows from that tree needs to be in your possession. The moment it's going into another person's possession or the public domain, or it's crossing somebody else's domain, Bikkurim have no obligation over there. Halacha Yud Aleph, Nasan lechaveirei reshus lahavrich b'seich shaloi. What if your friend gave you permission? He said, you can layer into my property, no problem. Afilu l'shah, even for a momentary time period. Harez and maybe Bikkurim. For now, it's considered growing in your land. You can bring Bikkurim from the fruit that grows from the tree. If your tree was right near the border of your friend's field, or it was leaning over into your friend's field, even though for other legal reasons you should distance your tree from your friend's field, you're allowed to bring Bikkurim and even read a declaration. In other words, it's full ownership of the Bikkurim and full obligation from this tree. This was one of the conditions that Yehoshua, Joshua, way back when he split the land and he apportioned it the first time to the Jewish people, he made a bunch of conditions into how the Jews are going to live with each other. One of them was a person is allowed to keep a tree at the border of his friend's field and bring Bikkurim from such a tree. It's considered growing in your property. Halacha Yud Beis ha'arisin v'hachachirin, sharecroppers and tenant farmers. Two types of arrangements where a person works for somebody else in his field, and either he gives the employer a fixed amount of produce, no matter what the field produces, or he gets a percentage, depending on each year what the tree produces, what the field produces. So in these cases, the questions are they the owners of the trees? Ubal Izraya, or forceful people, where they blackmail people, the owners of the land, and they buy their land for much less than their worth. The Hagazlanin, or robbers, Einan Mivin Bikurim, Va'afilu Nisyashu Abailim. They cannot bring Bikurim from their new land, even if the original owners despaired. Again, we have some from terrorists, some from robbers. They'll steal the real estate, but they want to know if they should bring Bikurim. So the Rambam says, no, you don't. Shenemar Bikurei ad mascha, same law, same verse. It has to be your land. In the latter cases, for sure, it's not like you stole it. Even in the first cases, you're just a tenant. You don't actually own it, and therefore, you don't bring Bikurim. Halacha Yud Gimel hakoine ilon b'seich stei chaverei. You have your friend's field, a bunch of trees in it, and you buy one. It's a different shade of green. That's the one that you bought. You own one tree in somebody else's field. Eine mevi. You cannot bring Bikurim from that tree lefisha ein le karka, because the halacha is when you buy only one tree in somebody else's field, you don't own any of the earth around it. So the Bikurim that will grow on this tree are not coming from your land. Shloisha, once you buy 3 trees in somebody else's field, and in this picture, the 3 different shaded trees, yesh le karka. The halacha is when you buy a unit of 3 trees in somebody else's field, you also own all the land between them. Hence, it's your land. Hence, the Bikurim that grows on it, you can bring as Bikurim. Even though practically speaking, you only own the trees, it's as though you acquire the land. Let's say a person made an explicit stipulation. I'm only buying one tree, but I want the real estate around it. I want the land around it. you're allowed to bring Bikkurim from that because, again, you own the land. It's clearly in the document, so it's ad mascha, it's your land's Bikkurim. Halacha yodad alekeach peris tlushin v'lakach hakarka. A person purchases fruit that was detached from the ground, that was already harvested, and he also buys together with it the real estate that they're occupying, the land that they're sitting on top of. You can bring Bikkurim because here's a scenario. You own land, you own its fruit. Yeah, they weren't attached when you bought it, but it came from this land, and now the land is yours. If the seller had sold him the fruit, aside from the real estate, and even if the fruit were attached to the ground, the seller can no longer bring the Bikkurim, because he doesn't own the fruit. The buyer cannot bring the Bikkurim, he doesn't own the real estate. If the seller bought back the fruit from the buyer, now he can bring the fruit as Bikkurim. Again, the bottom line is you have land, you have its fruit. Yes, somebody else owned it in the interim, but now you have it back, you get to bring the Bikkurim. A person sells a field to an idol-worshipping Gentile, buys it back. Biblically, you're still allowed to bring Bikkurim. The fact that for a time a Gentile owned this piece of real estate doesn't revoke the obligations on this land to bring all the agricultural gifts to Hashem. Yes, when the Goy owns it, he doesn't have to bring the gifts, but when he passes it back, it reverts to its original status, and you have to bring gifts. Halacha tazayin ashera shebitla. An ashera tree, remember way far back in the laws of idol worship, is a tree that was set aside for idol worship. Now the halacha is that when a non-Jew designates something for idol worship, while it's being served, it's forbidden to have any benefit from it. But if the Gentile is mevatel, he nullifies his connection to it, and he actively no longer wants it to be involved in idol worship, that's called bitla. So you have an Asherah tree, it was designated for idol worship, and then the guy canceled his relationship with it. Ein mevi'in mimeno bikurim. Nevertheless, you cannot bring bikurim from this tree anymore. Shahab bikurim kikadshe mikdashen. Because in this sense, bikurim are like holy sacrifices offered in the temple. And we're going to see in the Rambam's next book that when a person takes an animal and associates it even for a time with idol worship, it's no longer eligible to be brought in the Mizbeach. Same thing over here. Once the Bikkurim, this tree, has been associated with idol worship, it can no longer be brought as Bikkurim. Halacha Yud Zayin HaBikkurim Ein Lahem Shir Min HaTorah. Biblically speaking, how many fruit have to be brought as the first fruits? No amount. Aval Midivreim Tzarech Lahafrish Echad Mishishim. Rabbinically, you should take 1/60th of the growth. If a person wants to make his entire field into Bikkurim, he can make it. The Rabbi had interesting observations on this halacha, because you know that in one of the Haftarahs, we mentioned that the Jewish people are called Bikkurim. We're called Hashem's Bikkurim. So in that sense, it makes a lot of sense why there's no limit for Bikkurim. Because for a Jew, even the smallest thing that he dedicates to Hashem, even if it's one thought, one speech, one action per day, it already has the full status of Bikkurim. You've given yourself to Hashem in that one way, and that's Bikkurim. In the same way that Rabbi talks about making your entire field Bikkurim. You know, when it comes to Truma, for example, you can't say, hey, I want all my grain to be Truma. Why? Because the word Truma means separation. Separation, in the fullest sense of the word, is no good. Jewish person is supposed to engage with the world. If I says I want to be all separated, that's no good. But what's Bikkurim? Bikkurim means the first, the choicest. I want to give the choicest moments in my day, and the choicest resources that I have, I want to give them to Hashem. Hey, you want to give them all? Absolutely. Fantastic. Dedicate it all to Hashem. Halacha Yudches, Hifrish Bikurav, if a person separated, put aside his Bikurim, V'chazar v'hoisif aleyan oy itran. Then after he puts it aside, he wants to add more to it, or decorate the basket. As we'll see, they used to decorate the basket of Bikurim with other fruits or other things. Harei hatoisves ke Bikurim. So strong is this attachment that you added, it becomes like Bikurim. Now the Rogachover Goyen explains that it's not that it becomes as holy as the Bikurim, but it does become as part of the offering as Bikurim. What he calls Geder Hakrava versus Geder Kedusha. Bikurim has two definitions. There's a part of it that you're offering to the Kohen, and a part of it that becomes sanctified. Sanctified, the additions don't become sanctified, but they become as holy as they become as much part of the offering, as the rest of the Bikurim. Says the Rambam, when do we say this? If you bring the Bikurim properly, biblically, from Israel. But if you're bringing rabbinic Bikurim from Transjordan or from Syria, then the additions are not like Bikurim. Even though it may not be like the bikurim on the highest level, but it must be eaten in a state of ritual purity, because you've attached it, so you've attached it for something at least. Ideally, the decorations that are around the baskets of bikurim should be from the same types of fruits, also from the 7 species. Yutes, Ketzad mafrishan bikurim. What was the process of setting aside first fruits? Yered adam l'seich sadeu. The person would go down to his field. The farmer would go check his trees. V'raya te'ena shebikra, eshkel anavim shebikru, rimain shebikra, and he would discover, here's a fig that is beginning to produce fruit. Here's a cluster of grapes that's first. Here's a pomegranate that's first. Koishran bigemi. You would tie those fruits with a reed. V'omer, and you would say, Hare'elu bikurim. These are bikurim right there on the tree. You designated it. V'heim nasim bikurim b'mechubar mishakara lahen shem. The moment you called them their name of bikurim, they become bikurim, even though they're attached to the ground. V'afal pisha adayin lebashlu kol tzarkan, even if they haven't yet fully ripened, but they will ripen. I asked AI to make me a picture of a fruit with the string around it. That's what we came up with. It's a fig. On the tree, you put it around and you designate it. Once they're going to ripen and you're going to detach them from the ground, there will be no need to redesignate them, because you've already said on the tree that this is bikurim. If you didn't set them aside while they were attached, you didn't say any name about them, and then you picked them, you should definitely put them aside after you harvest them. If all your produce became ritually impure, you're not allowed to set aside bikurim in a ritual impure state. Find other produce that is ritually pure and put aside bikurim from that pile to cover the impure pile. If you have no other fruit, it seems to me, says the Rambam, too bad, we don't set aside bikurim in a state of ritual impurity. Because we don't put aside stuff just to be destroyed. If it's impure, no one's going to eat it. Kohen can't eat it. So what's going to happen? It's going to rot. So you don't do it. It also seems to me, says the Rambam, that if bikurim become impure, you don't get the leeway to use it for fuel of your oven, like let's say you would do with impure truma. They're like holy sacrifices. Once sacrifices become impure, they just got to go. You can't use them for anything else. Halacha chav hamafrish bikurav. If somebody puts aside bikurim, beautiful, luscious, delicious fruit, v'namaku, and then they rotted, oy nivzizu, or they were taken by others, oy avdu, or they got lost, oy shenignavu, or shenitmu, or they were stolen or became impure, chayav lahafrish acherim tachtei, you must bring new ones. You must replace them. Shenemar, because it says tavi beis Hashem alekecha. You got to bring your bikurim to the house of your God. Milameh, that teaches us that you got to bring it. You're obligated to replace them until you bring them to the Holy Temple Mount. Some sacrifices, if you make the pledge to bring them, then even if they get lost, you don't have to replace them as long as you put them aside. In some cases, the Bikkurim are not that way. You put them aside. If you didn't get them to their ultimate destination, you got to bring new ones. Halacha chaf aleph hamafrish bikurav laha leisan biyadei l'Yerushalayim. If a person puts aside bikurim to bring them by hand to Yerushalayim, in other words, his original plan was, I want to take them myself. Lo yishalchim biyad shliach. You shouldn't change your mind and now send them with an agent. V'im liktan mitchila al menach shalchim biyad shliach. But if you pick them to begin with, having in mind that you're going to send them with an agent because you know you can't make it to Jerusalem, let's say, harei zemut l'shalchim, then it's no problem. You're definitely allowed to send them with an agent.